Alright, well, we're going to work on the rear brakes on a 2004 Chevy Impala. This brake system has got a 60-40 ratio front to rear. One thing that you'll note if you're doing a full brake job, rear caliper is considerably smaller. Bolt sizes are smaller. The pad size is considerably smaller. So it's, I won't say it's easier, just smaller. We're also replacing the rotors on this vehicle. This vehicle had one or more what appeared to be rotors that were warped. So we've gotten a full set of rotors and a full set of pads, and we're going to replace them all. So to begin with, the bolt that holds the calipers on is the number 13. I'm using a breaker bar here, as you can see, just because little guys can be tough to get loose, and they are. All right, we're getting there now. Just a little tough, this one, to get started. Shouldn't be surprised. Brake bolts, they tend to run dry, much more exposure, and if you do it right, you snug them up nice and tight to start with. So I like to use a breaker bar to get them started, and then we'll switch to a ratchet. So this is a number 14. On these brake bolts, caliper bolts. Caliper bolts are pins. They're alignment pins for the caliper, so they're long. Alright, so to the bottom one. Okay, once you get those loose, take a long flat blade screwdriver, stick it up in here, and try to compress the wheel cylinder in the caliper, just so that you get some freedom of motion, so the caliper will come loose without being too tight on the wheel. Then you can take these pins the rest of the way out. These pins are in here good. Wow. Let's see if we can get the bottom one out, maybe. This is where brake grease is very useful. You go to your local parts store, you can find brake grease. Brake grease really helps prevent these bolts from getting stuck so easily. Alright, so this one's coming loose. There we go. There's the first one. Did have a little bit of brake grease on it, but obviously it had firmed up in there, huh? So let's see if we can get this top one out of here. Just for reference, we did the other side, and they came out without any problem at all. Now, what are we going to do about this? You'll notice this brake bolt is got a odd little indent on the end of it. It's normally a rubber boot that rides on there, apparently that rubber boot is still up in that hole. We'll figure it out in a minute. So caliper comes off at that point quite easily. And take off this back brake shoe. Note when you take the back brake shoe off, it has the little telltale rattle on it. This little guy contacts your brake disc and starts squealing to tell you it's time to change your brakes. We're going to use it as a pressure plate for now. We're going to use this little wonderful tool, which we'll put in here. Very inexpensive tool. Get it at your local parts house. Less than 10 bucks. It goes in. Now, when you begin to compress this, goal here is to compress this piston back up into the caliper. Do it nice and slow so that the fluid can return into the already full master cylinder reservoir and hopefully not go all over the ground. So there we go. When it tightens up, you know you're done. So we can pull this out, get rid of our old brake shoe. Since we're going to be taking the rotor off, not going right back on with this, use a wire tie just to suspend the caliper up out of the way and prevent creating stress on the brake line that goes to the caliper. I have broken one before. Front brake pad out, and then it's off with the caliper so that we can get to the rotor. The caliper itself is number 13. Once again, I'm going to use the breaker bar to loosen these bolts. You can't miss them. Pretty much only 2 bolts left on this part of the system, on this part of the braking system. So, on the other side. And then the goal again is to break them loose so that we can get on them with the ratchet and not break ourselves or the ratchet. So, here comes the other one. And there we go. So, number 13 on a 3/8 ratchet. And off it comes. These look like they're going to be a little better behaved than the pins were. And once we get this caliper bracket off, we'll replace the rotor. And while the caliper bracket's off, we're going to look at putting some lubricant down into the hole here and see if we can recover that little rubber cap that we have found on all of the top caliper bolts so far on this car. So, rotor, easy, eh? Hopefully. Rotor should slide off. It may be a little snug in places as it comes off. That's because this is the emergency brake system. You'll notice pads here. It's a solid ring that joins to a small cylinder here that forces the emergency brake out against the inside of that rotor. Ours are in great shape. Always want to look at them while you're there when you're replacing the rear calipers on modern cars that have the rear emergency brake. Just make sure that the system looks good inside. And in our case, we tested it before we took these off and it held well. So we're happy with that. So we'll go on with the new rotor. Always try to keep your grimy fingers as much off of the rotor disc this surface as possible. And certainly try to keep your hands free of greases and oils. So, if it'll come on here, it's nice for us, it'll be good. It should not be keyed in any way. It should just go straight on. In our case, emergency brake has got a little rub right there. And that's okay. There we go. So, caliper's on, the rotor's on. Now we'll see about that caliper bracket. Well, just to let you know, here's the caliper bracket, and it was the top. It was this hole that had the rubber footing that goes on the end of this bolt. We ended up popping off this boot, putting a little bit of WD-40 down in there, and basically we just slid the bolt in. The bolt re-secured to that rubber foot and it came out. So just in case it happens to you, you'll know what to do. So now we're going to go back on with this thing. It's pretty much reverse order. We're going to put the bolt in here, get it started, move to the bottom one, and this is the number 13 brake caliper retaining bolt. Not number 13, 13 millimeters. I always say that wrong. So we'll snug those back up, like so. Alright, so then we're going to go ahead and use our breaker bar, and snug them the rest of the way. Make sure we're happy with them. As I've stated in other videos before, and I'll continue in this one, there are probably torque specs for each and every one of these bolts. If you want to go look them up and apply them, you are more than welcome, encouraged actually. So here's the back pad. You can tell by the telltale rattler on the back. So we'll put it on the back. You need to make sure that it fits, it's slotted, the retaining plate slotted. Make sure that the slots aligned with the slots in the brake pad. I'll show you what I mean. There's a slot there in the brake pad. There's a slot here in the caliper. So it goes on slot to slot. There we go. Slot to tab. So the brake pads are in. We're going to grab our caliper again. And we're going to slide it on. They slide on quite readily. Now, one thing you have to look at, you can't see this very well on camera, but the rubber boots that are on the back of the caliper need to be set. Basically, you have to compress them, realign them. Top bolt. Initially, when I put these bolts in, all about getting the alignment pin in. Not worried about starting them per se yet. The biggest limit usually is getting them aligned with that boot. In this case, these have been a bit problematic, but that's okay. We'll make it happen. So it's number 14. And we're going to screw them in and press them in at the same time. They're not wanting to go real slick. Alright. Alright, well that bolt was giving us a bit of fits, but took it back out, used a little lubrication on it, and yeah, both the caliper bolts and alignment pins are in now. Just a matter now, tightening everything up. And as I said before, this is the number 14 bolts. And we like to get them tight with a ratchet. And then just finish tightening them up with a breaker bar. Wrong ratchet, no, wrong socket. All right, so once we get these tight to our liking, which that one is, this is that one. Once they're tight to our liking, then it's about putting the wheel back on, tire back on, dropping this thing off the jacks, and give it a go. Please, 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 if you replace your brakes, please check your fluid master cylinder reservoir, cap it back off, pump your brakes in the car before you ever start to move. Test your brakes at 5 miles, 10, 20 miles an hour, nice and slow. Make sure everything's good before you have too much confidence going down the road. So that is the rear brakes on the 2004 Chevy Impala. Hope it's useful.